That's emotional. We're all a bit. And Create is going to go out. Thank you, Joanne. We bless the young people as they go. Thank you for the young people of the church, Lord. We bless this time. Cynthia is leading out there. Have fun, everybody. Thank you, Joel. That was lovely. Good to see everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
What an amazing way to start the year. You could feel it when we came into the room, just that sense of it's a fresh start and there's a newness that God is doing. And we're doing something exciting this month in January here in the church. So if you're here, whether you come here every Sunday, whether you're back for visiting this Sunday, whether this is your first time here, God has you here for a purpose this Sunday. I really believe He has specifically called people to be here this Sunday. So this is the series that we're about to start, that we're going to run through the month of January. And this is called Level Up. It's a little bit different to the series we've been doing over the last number of weeks and months, which have been a little bit more structured, but we felt at the start of this year that God actually wanted to speak with freedom to His people. And it's always a little bit nervous as speakers to get into that space where you're trying to hear the Lord for what He wants to release, because it feels like a heavy responsibility. But the reality is that what is different about Jesus, what is different about the God that we serve, the reason we come here on a Sunday, to every other God that is served in the world by people, is that our God is alive. He is living and He's active. He defeated death and the grave. He's seated at the right hand of the Father, and He's interacting with His children. And so often we leave Jesus on the cross and we tell a story of the gospel, but the gospel is real and active, and it engages and interacts with us where we need it. And we believe that this month that God wants to speak to people specifically about the season of your life that you're in, that your living God wants to speak to you. And we are so blessed that we get to create an atmosphere where He speaks. And every time we do something like this, I'm nervous, and I don't know why I get nervous, because God wants to speak to people. Like He just does. It's who He is. He engages, He's interactive. And we've so many situations in life where it's awkward, and there's nothing worse than an awkward silence. You're just like, oh my God, someone please say something. And sometimes we think God is like that. But if God is silent, it's because He's just said something that He actually wants you to pay attention to. Or it's because in the silence He wants to communicate His presence. Because God's not awkward. God's speaking and moving and active in our lives. And this series, a number of people are going to get up over the next Sundays, and they've sought the Lord for weeks about what they feel He's doing in this season and what they feel like He wants to speak to you as the church. So God is actively releasing fresh manna that we're receiving and that we're releasing today. And as I was preparing, heaven was silent, and I was like, God, this is not funny. Of all times not to be speaking, this is not the time. And God reminded me of something, and I teach on the prophetic a lot outside of the church, and the prophetic is just our ability to hear God, understand what He's saying, and release that into our own lives or others' lives. And I love the gift of prophecy. I think it's an incredible tool that God has given His people and the church. But one of the things I teach on the prophetic is don't speak past the word. So often God gives us a word in its simplicity, and we add all these things to it. And I tell the story of this woman who came up for prayer, and she wanted prayer for her job, and she wanted to change job, and she wanted a word from God about whether she should change job or not. But as she was telling me this story, she was weeping, crying. She was like, God has to speak. He has to tell me what to do. You have to hear from God and tell me what to do about my job. And I instantly just felt so much pressure, and I was like, I'm not really sure that's how it works, but okay. So I'm like, it's okay, but let's pray, let's close our eyes and let's pray. And I'm like, oh my word. I was like, God, you have to speak to this woman. She needs to know what to do about her job. She's freaking out. It sounds like it's really stressful. I mean, you need to show me something or speak something. And all I see is a picture, some of you might have heard this, of Nemo the fish from Disney. And I'm like, that's not funny. This is really serious. This woman needs a proper word from God. Stop thinking of Disney characters, Lisa, and actually engage with the lady. So all I see is Nemo, Nemo, Nemo. I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, I'm so sorry, and this is very strange. I'm really sorry, but I just keep seeing the same picture. And she's like, yeah, what's God saying? And I was like, oh my word. I was like, Nemo, like the fish in Disney. And I'm ready for her to leave the building. And so she falls to her knees and she begins to weep and weep and weep. And I'm standing there, and I want to tell you that I had this revelation from heaven, but I'm going, what on earth just happened? So I get down on the ground and I sit with her, she weeps and she has this experience with God, and I say nothing. I do not know what Nemo means. So she stops crying and she begins speaking to me, and I'm like, can I ask you what just happened? And she's like, I work in a centre for children with autism, and it's a really difficult and challenging job. And on TV, every day, all day long, we play Nemo. That's all that plays on the TV in my workplace is Nemo. Finding Nemo all day. And she goes, as soon as you said Nemo, the Lord spoke and said, you are exactly where I've caused you to be for this season. And I just know I'm where I'm meant to be. Now, the push was to go, I see Nemo, I think what God is saying is you're in really deep waters, and He's with you in the deep water, and it's to begin to add all these things and speak past what God is doing, when God actually often speaks in simplicity. He spoke through fishermen, He spoke through the unschooled, He often speaks in the simple things. And as I was preparing this word, I was on the phone to Tracy all week, and she was like, well, have you got the word yet? And I'm like, no, nothing. She's like, okay, it'll come. I'm like, will it? But I had got these snippets, and I felt like the Lord was saying, you're trying to speak past the word, Lisa. Just release what I've given you. So what I'm going to share today is very, very simple. This is really simple, but I feel like God is bringing us back to a place of simplicity. And I want to speak from this verse. Even the stork in the sky knows her appointed seasons, and the dove, the swift, and the thrush observe the time of their migration, but my people do not know the requirements of the Lord. And I feel like the Lord is calling us into a place of understanding our season. I think He wants to speak to us this January about what season we are in individually. There's a season we're in as a church, and I think He's going to reveal more of that to us as I know we've prayer meetings coming up this month that I think are really important for us as a church in terms of our vision. But I believe individually for each person in the room that the Lord is going to begin to reveal to you over these coming weeks what season that you are in. And as He reveals the season, I believe there's going to be a grace to trust in His timing for our individual seasons. You see, God is a God of seasons. We don't always think this way, but He does, and He's an expectation that we would recognize the seasons. He shows it in nature. He's saying that nature actually has an ability to understand the season, and He rebukes the disciples in the New Testament for not knowing the times. He rebukes the Jews for not recognizing the time when the Messiah was due to come. And the Lord never rebukes us unless He expected and gave us the ability to do something differently. So He had given the Israelites the ability to recognize their season, but they were not paying attention to the shift in season and didn't recognize the answer when it came. And I believe the Lord is speaking the same thing to us. It's time to recognize the season that you are in and recognize the shifting in the season so that you're ready for the answers as they're released. We're going to look at Ecclesiastes 3:1. This is really famous verse. We'll all have heard it. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. If we actually meditate on that verse, God is very clearly saying that there's actually a season to everything. So that seasons come and seasons go and they change. Nature shows us that. And God is saying everything in your life has a season to it. There's an ordained time because God is a time of order. And often for us, our life can seem like chaos, especially when we go into challenging seasons. If you are in a winter season where it feels barren and it feels difficult, you begin to think, and I've done this so often, that God is not in charge or everything's in chaos and it feels like sinking sand, when all that's happened is the season has changed. And when we recognize the season, we recognize that God is unchanging in the season. The season has shifted, but who He is remains the same in the season. That He's a God of order. And just because your season has shifted does not mean the God you serve has changed in that season. I have a pet hate about romantic comedies, and I know many of the men will say, well, if you watch romantic comedies, that in itself should be a pet hate, because most men don't enjoy them. I love them. I love feel-good stories. I love things that are happy. I love things that don't have a sad end. But I have a pet peeve about them, and it's the same. Have you seen Bridget Jones? Many of you will have seen Bridget Jones, yes. And many have seen Notting Hill. Yeah. Two firm classics. But they both have the same scene. So in one scene in Bridget Jones, she's just after going through a breakup and she's heartbroken, and she is going across London Bridge. And as she goes across London Bridge, the seasons change. So it begins to snow, and then it starts to rain, and then the sun comes out, and then the leaves are coming off the trees. And the same thing happens to the beautiful Hugh Grant in Notting Hill, firm favourite. And he's walking through, and he's just got his heart broke. And the same thing happens, he's walking through the marketplace, and the seasons change. So the leaves fall off the trees, and it's raining, and it's snowing. And I'm like, oh, obviously they're reflecting the fact that time is passing, and the person is in pain as the time passes. But to me, they're the longest seasons. If you've ever been through a hard season, a season of hurt or pain or loss or heartbreak, the leaves do not just fall off the trees and the little rain come down. Those seasons are long and they're hard, but they're not reflected in feel-good movies. In feel-good movies, the season just shifts and changes, and then it moves back into the happy summer season. But actually in life, those seasons are the seasons of faith. They're the seasons where we find God. They're the seasons where our faith hits the road. They're the seasons when we figure out who we are in God and who God is in us. So seasons aren't always the summer seasons. It's often the winters, it's the autumns, it's the springs as things begin to spring up and grow. It's recognizing the changes. And so Ecclesiastic goes on to actually break down these seasons for us. And I'm going to read this. This is Ecclesiastes 3:2-8. And I want to encourage you in your own time this week with God, take out this verse in the Bible and sit with it. And begin to go through it and ask God where you are and where you have been. Where have you been in 2022 and where are you in 2023 in the seasons of God? There is a time to be born and a time to die. We understand that because it's reflected all around us in the seasons of life. A time to plant and a time to harvest. Now I want you to think about that. If you've been in a season where you're planting is hard work. Dad is great on this. He often talks about seasons and ploughing, and he's from a farming background, so it's really helpful to understand things like this. But if you're planting, that's hard labour. You're working hard in that season where you're planting. And you get into that mind frame of labour and working hard and diligence in a season of planting. But if you're in a time of harvest and a time of abundance, that's a time to enjoy. It's a time to give thanks to the Lord for the things that He's given you. And if you're there in a planting mindset in a season of harvest, you're going to miss so much of what the Lord is releasing in that season of harvest. And likewise, if you've been in a season of harvest and abundance in your life and you're suddenly moved into a season where the Lord is saying, we're doing a new thing, begin to plant, you're going to be like, but where's my harvest? Have I done something wrong? Have I missed something? No, your season has moved and the Lord is bringing you into a place of planting. There's a time to kill and a time to heal. We've done that today. So many things we've thrown in the bin. Things we're saying, no, I'm killing that in my life. I don't want that in my life anymore. Things we're recognizing that maybe we have to heal from. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to cry and a time to laugh. A time to grieve and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away. Now there's some of those things that when we think about them, we think about certain things and we associate them with God and other things we don't associate. I love one of the translations says, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And when we think about God, we think about reconciliation, we think about embracing, but actually God in season speaks, refrain from embracing that situation, that purpose, that person, whatever it is. There's times where God actually tells us to withhold. And if we're constantly moving towards embracing everybody and everything in a season where God is saying refrain from the embrace, then we're putting ourselves in situations that we shouldn't be in. So it's just constantly asking the Lord, what's my season? What are you asking from me and requiring from me? A time to keep and a time to throw away. There's things that have went in that bin that are not meant to be part of your next year. They're just not meant to come any further. And this can be the most painful. There's things I put in that bin that the Lord spoke to me in seasons past. They're not bad things, they're not sinful things. They're things he called me to for a season, and in this season he's saying, it's time to put that away. We're not doing that anymore. I'm doing a new thing. So some of the things we throw away aren't necessarily sinful things. Sometimes they're just your last season. And in order to step into your new season, you have to release the last season, even if there was good to it. A time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. There is a time and a season for everything under heaven. I'm going to get us to go to the next slide, and this has become a cornerstone in my life, this teaching. I'm not going to go into the whole level of it, but it's something that John Bevere talked about at one point, and it really, really spoke to me, and it was about the Israelites in the wilderness. And this map is the journey that the Israelites went on when they came out of Egypt and they were going to the promised land in Canaan. So in Egypt it starts over here, and the end point is at the other side. So they had a certain journey that they had to go on, and the journey was going to take 40 days. The journey was 250 miles by foot. So that journey was 40 days from Egypt out into Canaan. Now the purple loop in the middle is where they got lost. So this is where they circled and 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 they circled in the wilderness for 40 years. The journey and the distance did not change. They just kept going round in the same circle for 40 years. If there is ever a picture of people who missed their season and are a lesson to us about asking the Lord about our season, it's the Israelites in the wilderness. If they had released the last season, if they had let go of Egypt, if they had let go of their mindsets, it would have taken them 40 days to enter into the land of promise. And instead they stayed circling and circling and circling. And sometimes the hardest thing is realizing that you get to have grace for your new season. That you don't have to stay in pain and shame of your old season. That you actually get to let it go and by his grace step into the new season and enjoy the harvest and the fruit of the promised land. And instead we're like, no, 40 years here. It's like, and the Lord is saying, I didn't ask this for you. And we're whinging and complaining about a wilderness that God has said that was a time limited period to cross over. You don't have to stay in that place of transition. And the reality of this journey is that it had to take 40 days. They could not do the wilderness. And that's the piece that really stood out to me when I heard this word, was that they couldn't skip to the promised land. They had to go through a wilderness experience, but it was much shorter than what they ended up experiencing. And sometimes in the wilderness is the place where we connect to God, in the grief, in the loss, in the difficult seasons. They're my closest times with God when I'm going through things that are hard. And so sometimes I have this expectation that I'm only close to God in that place. And it can make us stay in places that actually we're meant to be moving on from into other seasons that God has for us. And I believe that God wanted to speak this to us as we begin this month and as we begin to reflect on the seasons that we're in and the seasons that are changing, is that we can't always speed up the process. No matter what the Israelites did, they had 40 days to spend in the wilderness. That was set. There was 250 miles that had to be travelled in the wilderness. They could not change that. But they slowed it down. And it became 40 years, and many of them didn't enter. And we need to look at situations in our lives and go, God, am I round in the same mountain, or am I just in the wilderness, in the place that I have to walk through? And if you're in the place where you have to walk through, know that it is seasonal and it will change, and promise is on the other side of it. And know that if you're round in the mountain again, at any point by his grace, he'll set you back on the track of 40 days and get you out of it. So it's time to ask him, am I round in mountains, or am I in the wilderness that has an end point? I'm going to get you to go to the next slide for me there. Just like the Israelites, we are sojourners in the land. And we are walking through seasons here on earth. And when we have that mindset that things here are temporary, that we're actually of another land, it begins to loosen us up to actually be able to receive and accept the seasons that are coming on us. Because when a season hits you and you weren't expecting it, you can't see past it. You can't see out between the trees. And the Lord is saying, actually, if you'll recognize that this is just for a time, it's for a period, and even your life on earth here is just for a time, that it's on to something else. It's on to glory for Him. It's on to the heavenly realm where we're actually moving towards as Christians. So I'm going to read this verse. It speaks to this. It's Hebrews 11:13-16. All these people were still living by faith when they died. So it's just spoken in Hebrews 11 about all our fathers and mothers of the faith. And this is saying all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. So they saw pieces of the promise only. Strangers on earth. Saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. So the greatest acts of faith, the men and women who worked in faith, are being shown to us here as the reason that they were able to operate like that is because they had a mindset that was temporary. They had a mindset that recognized everything here is temporary and I'm moving towards that which is permanent. So if we're looking to operate in faith as Christians, we have to have this same mindset that we can move through situations knowing this is temporary, this will shift, God will come, God will change this. When I was speaking to God, I always speak to God in the car. You can go to the next slide for me, Joe. When I'm on the way to work, that's part of my prayer time. And I was speaking to the Lord on the way up, and I was saying, Lord, I really need you to speak more on this. I feel like it's such a simple message, and that's when He began to speak to me about don't speak past the message. But I felt like He was saying, Lisa, I'm coming for the weary this Sunday. That's my plan. I'm coming from those who are weary. And I looked up the meaning of the word weary, because we use it all the time. But weary means to be very tired, especially after working hard or journeying for a long time. It's to be bored with something because you've experienced too much of it. Such a great explanation of weary. And we definitely all have seasons where we feel weary, and many of us may be in that season right now where you're like, I've just had too much of this. I've been on this journey too long. I'm tired because I've been working. Those aren't weary that have been sitting down and doing nothing. Weary is from those who've been journeying, travailing, trying to move in faith, but it's been going on too long and it's too hard, and there's a weariness that settles in. And I believe God is speaking Proverbs 13:12 to us, and I took it out of the New King James just because I love the way it's phrased. It says, hope deferred, I'll say it half normal, hope deferred makes the heart sick. But when the desire comes, it is a tree of life. And what I love about this is we always say heart deferred makes the heart sick, and we don't think about the second part of the verse. And in the King James, it links it with but. So it says, hope defers make the heart sick, but when the desire comes. So it's not just saying when things come, it's saying, no, when the desire comes that you're longing for, that you're praying for, that you're hoping for. It attaches faith to it. That this is a tree of life. So that actually the answer to the weariness is in the ability to push past and trust that the promise will come. Maybe not the way we expected it to come, maybe in a different way, in a different package, in a different way that God is doing, but that God answers promises. He answers the things that we seek Him for in His way, in His appointed time. And I believe that this is the answer to the winter seasons in our lives that make us feel weary, is that they do end. Seasons come and seasons go, and we might be in seasons right now that feel like they will never end, but seasons end. That's the nature of what they are. Often differently than we expect, but they shift and they change. And what I felt like the Lord was saying to us is that He wanted us to look for the answer in the seed and not in the tree. So the Lord often answers a thing by giving us a little seed. And it's that seed that we pour into that creates the tree of the answer to the thing that we're looking for. So they say preach what you know. So for example, if I'm praying for a wonderful husband to come on a white horse, it's a great plan for my life. He's not going to knock on the door, as I'm told 100 times a day by different people. He's not going to just rock up to Clarke and be like, I've arrived, I heard the prayers, I know it's been a while, but here I am. Come in, handsome, charming man that's loaded rich, it's wonderful to see you. That's not how it works. So the reality is I have to go on the first dates. I have to meet people, I have to have the awkward conversations, I have to do all the things. Why? Because I'm looking for the seed. I'm looking for the seed, because my answer is in the seed. And at some point, the seed is going to be the right seed. And it's the same in your life, whatever the situation. So you're praying into your finances, and you're praying that the Lord will bless you, and you're praying for abundance. And Lord, send the lotto, Lord, send the big amount, Lord, pay off the mortgage, pay off the house. And the Lord sets up an opportunity for a second job. Or the Lord sends 2% increase in your wages. It's the seed. The answer is in the seed. And so often we look past it. You're a praying parent, and you're praying and praying and praying for breakthrough with your child. And there's like this tiny little glimpse of hope over the Christmas where they don't grunt at you. It's the seed. It's the seed. And it's recognizing the seed and going, God, I'm going to thank you for the seed while I wait on the fulfillment of the tree to grow. And so many of the things that we're feeling burnt out about and we're feeling weary about, I felt like the Lord wanted to speak to say, I want to speak to you about your seasons. Because that's where you're losing hope in me. That's where you lose the ability to recognize who I am, because you're looking at the season as permanent. And it's not permanent, it's a season. And as we're looking at the season, and the season is consuming our whole focus on God, we're losing sight of the character of the one who is unchangeable, who's seated on the throne, who's not thrown or disappointed by our circumstances, who's not even shocked, who's seeking down and saying, Lisa, I want to speak to the weary because I see that you're weary, I see that you're tired, I see that it's exhausting, but I'm going to send seeds to show you that your season will end and it will shift. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back, but just as I do, I want to speak the words of this song over us. They're going to sing a different song over us as we close, but I just want to speak these words from this beautiful song. If you don't know the song, it's called Seasons by Hillsong, and Seasons by Hillsong is on my slides. Sorry, it's the last of my slides. It's a beautiful song, and I listen to it all the time. This is one of my, when I need faith for change songs. But it's speaking about seasons, and it's speaking about God as a God of seasons. And it says, like the frost on a rose, winter comes from us all. Oh, how nature acquaints us with the nature of patience. And like a seed in the snow, I've been buried to grow, for your promise is loyal from seed to sequoia. Though the winter is long, even richer the harvest it brings. And though my waiting prolongs, even greater your promise for me like a seed. I believe that my season will come. There's people in the room that need to own that today. That it's not for everyone else, that your season will come with what God has spoken. Lord, I think of your love like the low winter sun, and as I gaze, I am blinded in the light of your brightness. Like a fire to the snow, I'm renewed in your warmth. Melt the ice of this wild soul till the barren is beautiful. And this is the declaration this morning. I can see the promise. I can see the future. You're the God of seasons. I'm just in the winter. If all I know of harvest is that it's worth my patience, that if you're not done working, God, I'm not done waiting. Because you can see my promise. And even in the winter, because you're the God of greatness, even in a manger. For all I know of seasons is that you take your time. You could have saved us in a second, but instead you sent a child. For the answer that was awaited by the Israelites for thousands of years that the Messiah would come, he didn't send a grown man that was ready for war. He sent a baby, a seed, as the answer. And it took time for him to grow into the man that would change the world. So Father, I pray right now, Lord, for each one of us, God, for every circumstance, Lord, in this room, Lord. I thank you that you are a living God. I thank you that as we start 2023, God, that you want us to start with our eyes fixed, focused, weariness taken off us, God, so that we're strengthened anew for what's at hand. And God, I cannot change the seasons in this room, but we can recognize them. And we can recognize that they are temporary and that you are eternal. We can recognize, God, that they will change and they will shift, but our faith in you remains constant, unmovable, unchangeable, that you are the rock, that you are the firm place, that you are the place that we seek hope from. And so, God, I ask for every person weary in this room, Jesus, I ask for fresh revelation to fall on what their season is. And I pray for the tools to walk through their seasons. God, I thank you for every winter season that's going to bear fruit in the future. I thank you, God, for seeds being released into spring seasons. I pray we'd recognize them. God, I pray for every season that's been placed in that bin. Lord, I thank you that they are before the throne. We release them to you. And God, I pray for each person in this room that needs to let go. That your old season is gone. It's gone. And I pray, Jesus, that there would be an ability to take a hold of the new. I pray you would teach us how to do this. And I pray that we would run forward, God, towards that which you have for us as you speak to us this month about what our season is. If you want to stand, we're going to close in worship as we